That was great.
I'm going into hibernation for the next 2 months.
And happy Mother's Day in advance to you guys. If you are mothers, and I know you are.
Yes, thanks, Donna. You too.
Hey, Tisha.
Hey, Councilman.
Hey, how are you?
It's Thursday, almost Friday,
It is.
so I'm good. How are you?
Oh, great.
You have, I'm always amazed. I'm like looking at the top and wondering what's on the bottom. Do you have like pajama pants on or something?
Today I got jeans. So look, some days, not so much, but today we got jeans because I actually had to go
Good
someplace.
job.
So yeah. Yeah.
So it's 5:31. Are we going to wait a few more minutes?
I have 5:29, so let's give
5:29.
let's give people one more minute because they're coming in.
It's late, and my staff must have changed my phone time so that I could be on time.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Elijah. How you doing, bro?
Hey,
Good to see you, man.
same here.
All right, I got 5:30. You wanna get us going, Tisha?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well on this Thursday, almost Friday. And also want to just acknowledge my amazing co-chair, Councilman Zeke Cohen. And he does have on jeans with that blazer today, which is great. And we are happy that it is once again an opportunity for us to get together as a task force, and very excited about this evening. And I don't have any general announcements. Do you want to get things started? Do you have any announcements for the group before we go into the agenda?
No, I'm good to go.
Ann, do you have anything? All right, well, let's put our seatbelt on and take off. We're going to move right into our round the horn, right, Ann? Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And are we going to do breakout groups first, Ann?
So the breakout groups are where the round the horn will happen. So we are going to break into
4 groups.
4 groups.
Yep.
One will stay here so that we can continue to be live on YouTube. As a reminder, this is a streaming meeting that is live and being recorded. The rounds question that you're going to be answering in your group is, what, if any, changes have you noticed in discussion about the impact of racism in our community? And we're thinking kind of within the last year time frame. So in the past year, as we think about events, probably starting with George Floyd, and as we've been in COVID in particular, have you noticed any changes in the way that people talk about racism in our community? So in your small group, you're going to tell your name, your pronouns, and then you're going to answer that question. And I'm going to put it in the chat so that you can all see that question. I've put the agenda in the chat as well.
Thank you, Ann.
And so there's the question.
And then you do your magic, and then we go to our breakout rooms.
Exactly. There's a couple of people who've hopped in, so I'm assigning people to rooms real quick.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then we will, okay, I'm going to open rooms. You're going to have about 30 seconds to answer that question.
30 seconds.
I know.
Wow.
Short.
Very. Got it.
All right. So I have Neha in facilitating one group, Shaquille facilitating one group, and then Matt will facilitate one group and I'll facilitate a group. So sending you off to your rooms.
All right. See you soon, everybody.
All right. So this is the main room that people may join. There are a couple of people who've texted to say, hey, I'm coming. So our group is a little bit smaller than the other groups with the anticipation that there's going to be some people who pop in. But I will go ahead and go first. So my name's Anne. I help facilitate the work of the implementation of the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act and this task force. My pronouns are she, hers. And, you know, over the last year, I would say in the communities I'm a part of, we've been much more willing to talk about racism. I think COVID in particular has amplified the impact of some of our systems that have policies that amplify racist policies. And in the past, we haven't been willing to kind of call that out as much. And at least in the work that I do, that's really at the forefront. And it leads almost every conversation in thinking about what is the impact of racism. So I'm going to go down the list as I see it and see if Dr. Tara would go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tara, Dr. Tara. I go by she, her, and I literally bit into a sandwich. And I was like, watch Ann call me. So sorry. In my community, this will be from personal, we have been a lot more willing to not talk about the impacts of racism, like from a traumatizing lens. We've been a lot more willing to talk about like healing and like things that we're doing to promote joy and like laughter and like time outside, to not be consumed by the burden of racism. And that's been very nice. It's been very nice to have safe spaces where you can just exist. So.
Great. All right. Teresa.
Hey everyone, I'm Teresa Bruce, as it says on my screen, she, her, hers. And I'm thinking about the education field in particular. And what's interesting to me, the major change I've noticed about the discussion around the impact of racism is now that we're not whispering it. So it's not like this is some big secret, right? Like that racism impacts the education field, but it was always like whispers, like, yes, hush, hush. And now what I'm noticing is that people are no longer like whispering about it or having side conversations, but it's being brought to the forefront and people are like saying like, look at what it is. And people are also taking notice outside of the education community on how it impacts our students and our families.
Awesome. You were right at 30 seconds. So well done maximizing your time. All right. I'm going to come next to Zeke.
Great. Zeke, City Councilor District 1, he, him, his pronouns. So yeah, I represent a lot of several predominantly white communities in Southeast Baltimore. And there actually has been a lot of willingness to engage in this conversation. We have a new organization that formed the Canton Anti-Racism Alliance, and together we were successfully able to take down the John O'Donnell statue. O'Donnell, as it turned out, was a slave owner, and we organized and spent about 8 months doing it, and then away he went. And we're now doing a bunch of other work in partnership with other neighborhoods, but I've been proud to see my communities that traditionally have, one, been not willing to talk about it, and two, just been a lot of white supremacy and racism embedded in the conversations we've had and in the spaces we exhibit. So it's been good to see the shift. I'm done.
Great. Thank you. All right. Elder.
Hi, everybody. My name is Young Elder. My pronouns are she and hers. And honestly, I would say, since I'm coming from the youth perspective, I would actually say the same thing like Miss Teresa said. Like before, you didn't really hear youth talking about racism, and you didn't really hear youth even being educated about it. So now I work with an organization called Heart Smiles, and we go on YouTube Live, and we're able to give the youth a chance to actually speak how they feel about experiencing racism in the city just on everyday occasions. So, and definitely with social media now, even though a lot of times, like with the youth, you may see videos of like really bad racism. At the same time, you also see posts like awareness, like, and how to overcome racism, and trying to empower being Black and stuff like that. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. Next on my list is Desiree.
Hi, everyone. My name is Desiree. I'm with Bolton Therapy and Wellness. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And how has racism conversations about it impacted the community? Well, from a therapeutic standpoint, definitely clients are much more open to discussing and seeing racism as trauma. Like, I think prior to last year, it was sort of like, oh, that's just how it is, just sort of how the world is, and I just have to figure out how to deal with it. But looking at it from a trauma lens, I'm able to have more discussions with them about how we can heal from it, as opposed to just accepting it as is. And then from organizations, a lot more conversations around how to create more DEI opportunities, like real opportunities, not just lip service. How did I do, Anne?
You did great. I didn't even start the timer because our group is not that tight on time. So,
okay.
All right. Councilmember Ramos.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Sorry to be a little late. The Bus Boys and Poets just opened up in my district. So I was at the opening with the mayor. It was very cool. So I represent parts of Hamden, which has been a traditionally white, very racist neighborhood. But I have seen, as the generations change there, a much different conversation. Particularly over the last year, the community association has really started these conversations internally. They're kind of conflating what does public safety mean to us and how can we be anti-racist, which I think together is good, but also talking about separately is important as well. So they're still working through their process, but I'm very proud of them for taking it on, particularly in the traditionally very white neighborhood. It is still very white, but more people are starting to come on to the avenue. It's starting to look different. The shops are different now. We've got Jamaican place, we've got an Indian place, we've got, so that's good. But there's so much more work to do there. And then also, I have a few neighborhoods in my district that have started mutual aid groups. And that has been as a result of the pandemic. However, they've also started to be very vocal about, anti-racism and anti-racist conversation, and what does it mean to be an anti-racist? So it's been very interesting to see, and I'm very proud of my constituents. There's just a long way to go.
Yeah. I think I was part of a conversation a few years ago with someone who was talking about progress around LGBTQ rights, and they were talking about this was right around when the Supreme Court ruled on gay marriage, and they used the term when someone asked, like, how have you maintained hope over the last so long? And they said, you know, we had to look for small progress, and the phrase happy but not satisfied. So this, I think a lot of what you're saying about the work in your district is that, like, happy that there's progress being made and not yet satisfied. Like there's always more to be done, but recognizing and celebrating with people when they're making that progress, I think is really important. So, all right. Well, thank you for sharing all. I'm gonna close the breakout rooms and bring everyone back, and we'll all be back together in just a minute. And I almost just ended the meeting instead of ending the breakout rooms, which is not what we want to do. All right.
Odette, how'd the kickoff go? People are having a good time.
Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. Zeke, they have a room, it's called the Elijah Cummings room.
Awesome.
Even during my remarks, I was crying about it. I mean, they did such an amazing job, just with the quotes and the pictures. I mean,
That's so good. You know what? Maya had sent me a picture of that room and was like, "You got to come by."
It's phenomenal, and it's emotional. I wasn't the only one. Even the mayor, like, I was standing there with him, and we were both very emotional about it. So, but the owner is great. The vibe in Busboys and Poets is amazing. So, yes. They're doing poetry and so it's great. They don't have their liquor license totally, so they're not completely open, but they'll be part of the scene very soon.
It's awesome. So glad they're here.
Me too. I'm totally excited about it. It's great. And then I've got Red Emma's coming on the other side in about a year. So amazing. Yeah. But that Elijah Cummings room is very powerful.
All right. I think we are all back from our breakout room. So I'm going to back to Tisha. Tisha, you're on mute.
Thank you, Anne. I hope everybody had a good round the horn. We're now going to one of my favorite parts of our normal agenda is when we get to know each other more deeply for the get to know you session. And so we have 3 task force members that we're going to highlight: Lindsay, Brendan, and Tamar. And I'm just going to ask you guys to pass the mic when you finish doing what you're doing, your intro. Anne is still always in control of the clock. So when she says time's up, don't be mad at me, be mad at Anne. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic to Lindsay.
Thank you, Tisha. And thank you, everybody. I'm excited to tell you all a little bit more about myself. I'm going to share my screen. I unfortunately don't have a cool video like so many other people had amazing videos and things that they put together. I'm just humbled by everybody that's here, but I just have a quick couple pictures on a slide to show. Sorry, I did not. How do I do? Sorry. Okay, so in 5 minutes or less, I want to tell everybody about my story of what psychology in the field, one of the terms we have is post-traumatic growth, how I've been through what I've been through and why I do the work that I do. And the first thing I want to say is that as a survivor of childhood trauma, I think that when you go through trauma, you don't know that what you're going through is called trauma. You just assume that it's normal and that this is just what life is like. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I learned that it actually was not normal and it was not okay, and that it was actually called trauma. So a little bit about myself. I am considered mixed race. I identify as biracial. I have a white mother and a Black father, and I have an identical twin sister and an older half brother. And when we were born, my mom was not married to my father. They were not together when I was born. And so I was raised by a single mother from the ages of when I was born till about 5 years old in Northeast Philadelphia. and it was really hard being raised by a single mother. She had no family support. My mom was essentially disowned by her family when we were born because we were Black, and my father was not involved in her life. So it was just the four of us just struggling to get by. And then my mom met my stepdad, who's also a Black man and had 3 mixed race kids. And we thought this was amazing. We were going to be the Brady Bunch and have this, mixed race, big family and the suburbs of Pennsylvania and a nice big house and a nice neighborhood with good schools. But it was the opposite. And from the ages of 5 to 17, I grew up in an incredibly abusive home. My stepfather was very abusive, and there was substance use, there was domestic violence. It was a very traumatic childhood. And when I turned 17, or around the ages of 16, 17, I joined this program called Upward Bound through Lincoln University and HBCU in Pennsylvania, and it saved my life. It's a program for first generation college students. So kids, mostly minority, who have families that have never been to college, and it just helps them navigate that process. But it was so much more than that to me. For me, it saved my life, and it saved my family's life, because it showed us that there was another world outside of what we had grown up in and what we had been through. And it showed us a pathway out, especially for me and my sister. Education was our way out and was our path toward healing. And so we were in this program for 3 years in high school, and they helped us get into college. And I went to Dickinson College in Pennsylvania, and I didn't major in psychology. Actually majored in international studies. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just know I wanted to get away, and I wanted to be somewhere else. And I wanted to learn languages and cultures and just explore all that was there in the world. Through Upward Bound, they helped us introduce us to a lot of different cool poets and speakers, and we won awards and just really built up our self-confidence and showed us that we could do what we wanted to do in the world. So like I said, I ended up going to Dickinson College, got a bachelor's in psychology. And the reason I switched over to psychology was because in one class I learned about the ideas of post-traumatic stress, trauma, post-traumatic growth. And for the first time in my life, I had these words that put language to what I had experienced, that I didn't know what it was. And later on, much later on in my career, I would learn about meaning making, and how in the field of clinical psychology, when you work with trauma, you learn about how making meaning from your experience is a very powerful way to heal from what you've been through. And so for me, learning about psychology and practicing psychology was a way that I made sense of what I had been through. After I graduated, I got my master's in psychology at Loyola University, and that's when I moved to Baltimore when I was 21 years old. And then from there, I worked for a few years, and I went back to school to get my PhD in clinical psychology and community psychology at UMBC. And I also had dual interest in clinical work and trauma. And I decided I wanted to work with kids because I wanted to really help kids who had been through just what I had been through, basically. And I also had dual interest in research and community psychology, and my research in my PhD program focused on interracial families and mixed race identity, and how interracial families talk about race and identity. And so just another area of my life I wanted to understand more and explore more. And so this is me at a conference just presenting on some of my research, and just how multiracialism and mixed race identity is really important to my identity. And I'm sorry for the grainy picture, but just to end, everyone knows now that I work at Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital as a pediatric psychologist, doing what I love to do. I'm creating a new trauma and healing program here at the hospital that's already received 2 grants for funding. And I'm just so excited I'm humbled, I'm happy to just be alive and to be here, and to be healed and to be working with you all. So thank you.
All right, great job, Lindsay. Thank you. That was really wonderful. Now we'll pass it to Brendan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Tisha. I actually created a video. I wasn't sure if I would make it home in time to present a live PowerPoint, but so I'll pass it to Anne just to start the video for us.
I had it all queued up and then it disappeared. So give me just 1 second.
this wonderful Bitmoji. My name is Brennan McFadden, and I am a secondary math teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools. And I thought creating a little video about myself, my education philosophy on teaching, and a little history might help us to get to know me better. So I grew up in a suburb outside of Philadelphia with my family. That's my brother and my sister. And as you can tell from the picture, I was quite an energetic child. And I actually moved to Baltimore for college. So I went to Goucher College for my undergraduate degree, and I got involved in education, did some student teaching, and fell in love with the city, with city schools, and Baltimore in general. So I did stay. I was hired by both Teach for America and Baltimore City Public Schools, and decided to do Teach for America for some continued professional development. And I got a master's at Johns Hopkins University as well. And these are some of the foundations of my educational philosophy, PBIS, restorative practices, and then 2 books that have been important to me. I'm also an active member of the union and have gone on a number of trips to talk about how these things impact school climate and culture. So my professional journey has been interesting as well because I've worked at a number of schools that have either closed or turned around. I started my career at Baltimore Talent Development High School over in the Sandtown neighborhood in the Harlem Park complex with Augusta Fells and Harlem Park Elementary Middle. And after my first year there, the school closed. That was devastating to me and a lot of the students and staff that I made great connections with. And so we were all kind of, because of school choice, sent all over the city. So I lost a lot of those connections, unfortunately. And from there, I went to ACE, the Academy for College and Career Exploration in Hamden. A totally different area, but the school was similar. Some of the students from Baltimore Talent came to ACE. So I was able to keep some of those connections, but then ACE, the school in general, started to fail. And we went through a bunch of different administrators, and then it was a turnaround school. So I left ACE and went to Cross Country Elementary Middle and started teaching middle school for the first time. And it went great. I made a ton of connections there, loved the students, loved the staff, loved the community there in Park Heights, or right near Park Heights. And unfortunately, or fortunately for the school, they were a 21st century school, but that meant that the school day totally changed and went to 4 or 5 o'clock, so I couldn't coach. So I made the decision to switch schools again and go to Roland Park. And from all these experiences, I felt similar to what I think many of our students go through in jumping around, losing connections with important people, mentors, students as well, mentees. And it has really helped me understand the dynamic and what many of our students go through when they move or transition schools and buildings throughout their educational journey. And as the educator on the task force, I think it's super important to discuss and talk about how, although all of these city schools are in totally different neighborhoods, perform totally different, function totally different, different areas, communities, schools, they all had one major thing in common, and that's that there has been an increased stress and anxiety levels that students are dealing with and understanding, as well as staff members. And we as a district, I don't think are doing all that we can to make sure that the stresses, anxieties, and traumatic experiences that our students and staff deal with is properly addressed. And here are some pictures from the different schools I've worked at. The middle is one of my good friends and mentee, Royal, who was a student at ACE that was able to get in and graduate from Goucher last year, and she is now teaching secondary social studies. In my teaching, I also think it's really important to try to do a lot of different things outside of the classroom with students. So here are a couple examples. When we were at ACE, there was gardening and beekeeping that took place. The kids, our students were able to make honey, which was awesome. On the bottom left, we were able to connect with kids in kayaks, which took us down to Middle Branch Park, and the students were able to kayak, which was awesome. I love to travel. The top left there is a Buddhist temple in Thailand. The top right, that's my son Kingsley gardening with me in our backyard. The bottom left is one of the soccer teams that I coached, and the bottom right, I've been able and fortunate to allow a bunch of international teachers to come and learn in my classroom, and then learn more about how teaching looks, sounds, and feels in their countries as well as ours. So thanks so much. That's just a little bit about me, some reasons why I wanted to join this task force, and that's all. So I think I'm going to pass it. I believe Tamara was next, if I'm not mistaken. So I will pass it to him.
Hi, thank you.
I'm sorry, her.
That's all right. Just have a few slides. So I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side. My dad was from Israel. My mom was from the Bronx, and I grew up Jewish, but not religious or religiously observant. I struggled a lot with anxiety and depression growing up. And because of that, in a lot of ways, I did not really enjoy being a kid or a teenager. I went to therapy. My family had the means to access services, which I know a lot of young people don't. And in a lot of ways, therapy was helpful, but at the same time, it was also humiliating. And I felt like there was a power differential between me as a young person and the therapist, and I felt pathologized. So it was a mixed bag. And then when I was in 8th grade, I found out that my father had been married twice before and that I had an older half sister. I met her, I got to know her, and it turns out she had gone through extreme long-term abuse and trauma, and I could see how much that still affected her. And just the fact of how completely random and unfair it was that she went through this trauma and I didn't hit me really hard and had a really profound impact on me. I decided to become a clinical psychologist to work with people who experienced anxiety and depression and trauma because that felt close to where my heart was. But I always was a bit conflicted about clinical psychology because of my own experiences in therapy. After I got a PhD in clinical psychology, I moved to San Francisco to do an internship, and I worked there at a public sector clinic at the San Francisco General with people who had serious trauma histories and were struggling a lot with hardships due to poverty. And my training up to that point felt really inadequate. So I had learned a lot about things like dysfunctional thought patterns and cognitive vulnerability, and it just felt really off with the clients I was working with. And I got really interested in social determinants of mental health and how the context shapes us. And I was really fortunate to work with a mentor who was doing work on preventing mental health problems. His name was Ricardo Munoz. This is a picture of him. And so I just became really hopeful about the idea that maybe we can reach people where they're at before they need to come in for treatment, and we can do it in non-stigmatizing ways and strength-based ways. And I was working in the Latino mental health research program. So I also started sort of waking up to my whiteness in a new way during this time. And I went from there to Boston, where I learned more about public health in a fellowship, and that brought me to Hopkins in 2006. And so, you know, a lot of my work at Hopkins has been adapting and testing interventions to promote mental health for students in Baltimore City schools, and especially mindfulness approaches, which have also been really important in my own life. And I've been lucky to work with folks like the Holistic Life Foundation and others. So in 2018, I became director of the Center for Adolescent Health, and now this feels like a family for me. So the center has been a prevention research center for over 25 years, and we have a mission to promote youth health equity and wellness with a special focus on Baltimore City. So we work with an amazing community advisory board, and I revived an older practice of working with a youth advisory board we call the YAB. I'm thrilled that our amazing YAB member, Young Elder, is part of this task force. And also, I was so fortunate to meet Joni Hollifield and really develop a close partnership with her and Heart Smiles. They've really helped to help our YAB thrive. And our YAB really advises the center on all the work that we do. So we really want to encourage young people to be leaders, and instead of making young people feel sort of small or judged, create a space where youth voices can be heard and can be respected. And I, hope hopefully sort of breaking down some of the power differentials that I felt growing up. Also, as a kid in New York City, I often felt like a teeny, powerless person who couldn't have a big impact. And it really fills me with joy to see the YAB members developing as young leaders and changing the world. Over the past few years, I've been trying to educate myself about my own racial biases and to become an anti-racist. And I recognize that as a white woman at Hopkins, who is not from Baltimore and the communities that I work with, that I am part of a white supremacist system, which perpetuates harm, and that's historical and ongoing. I also know I've probably benefited in my own career more than the communities that I work with in many ways. And then also a lot of my training is focused on how to develop programs that help children cope with stress. But I realize more and more that it's harmful not to also, and more importantly, tackle the root causes of oppression and structural racism that cause the stress and trauma in the first place. So I am, absolutely still navigating these tensions and learning more and more, and really grateful to be learning so much from the amazing young people and adult partners that I work with and our great team members at the center. And my hope is to help support a movement of healing in Baltimore. And that's why I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Lindsay. Great job. This is just always my favorite part of our time together. And guess what? We are running right on time. So we are going to move to our next agenda item, which is our diversity, equity, and inclusion session and a call for healing. And I think we have two co-presenters, Colby and I always say your name wrong,
Fariha.
Fariha. Yes, Fariha. Thank you so much. Colby and Fariha are going to do our diversity, equity, and inclusion session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tisha. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Unfortunately, Colby is not feeling well today, so I am facilitating by myself, but I'm really excited to have Colby join us again next time. So today, I really invite you into a call for healing. One of the things that I use to heal myself is just activating all of my different senses. So I'm letting it lavender incense just to get us started and set that virtual mood. It's so hard to do these healing workshops virtually. So thank you for letting me light my incense to set the mood. All right, everybody. So these are all of the collective agreements that we've been really working on over the last few trauma-informed care task force meetings. It's a big list and it's an ever expanding list. So if you ever have something that we need to add, definitely put it in the chat box, put agreements next to it, and we'll go back and add it. But because it's such a long list, I really wanted to call out and focus on 3 today. So I want to focus on promoting self-care and healing within ourselves and within each other as members of the task force. I really want us to also own our impact, not just as individuals breathing and living and doing magical work in Baltimore, but also as a collective unit. We're all appointed to serve on the task force to get better outcomes for the next generation of Baltimoreans. And lastly, the 3rd agreement that I really want to highlight today is just creating this culture of learning. So I really appreciate everybody's vulnerability, honesty, as Erica said last time, and just everybody really being willing to share their lived experiences, their expertise. In this space, I really appreciate that. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have at the end of your name. What really matters is your intersectionality. What really matters is your lived experiences. And I guarantee you, we all have something to learn from every single person in this space. So I really hope that people step up when I ask for a call for healers or facilitators at the end of my 15 minutes. But I lit the incense. Let me do some more grounding work. I want to ground you in a couple of stories. So you might be saying, Fariha, a call for healing? Why do we need healing in Baltimore? Well, I'm sure all of you have stories of why we need healing in Baltimore, especially right now in the pandemic. But I want to share 2 stories with you. The first story I want to share is it's something that I'm still processing. It's something that's really, really rough for me that actually just happened this week. And so I've been looking at the news, I've been looking on social media like all of you, and I noticed there's an uptick of community violence recently. We've had so many members of our community that have been hurt and harmed, and for some of them, it's been fatal. While scrolling across social media, you know, normally I read it and the story sits with me, but this time it sat with me for a really long time because I actually recognized somebody in the story. So I found out this week that somebody who was only 31 years old unfortunately passed away from gun violence. She was shot and killed by her husband. And that really sat heavy with me because I used to be in an abusive relationship, and, you know, relationships are hard. Abusive relationships are even worse. So it sat with me heavy for that reason. And it also sat heavy with me because that was a mom of one of my students, one of my favorite students. So like, I have this picture in my classroom, and this little girl, I had taught her for 2 years. She drew a picture of her mom, and right next to it, she drew a picture of me. And I went into my classroom today, and that picture is still next to my desk. And now there's only one of us still alive. And she's such a little girl. So that's sitting really heavy for me. And I just keep thinking, is there more that we could have done for her? Is there more we could have done for her family? Like, we use restorative justice, we use conflict resolution, we use de-escalation, we teach our students these things. I taught her, but of course, those lessons didn't transfer over into, you know, what her parents decided to do. So that's been really hard for me this week. And so I'm inviting you all, I'm inviting myself into a call for healing. And normally when I think about these really traumatic situations, what helps me is thinking of the hope and finding the hope. So I want to share some words of wisdom that actually come from one of my students' brothers. Unfortunately, this is the older brother, Quan. The younger brother was unfortunately also, he passed away from asthma before he even made it to middle school. So again, a lot of trauma in our students' lives, a lot of trauma just in Baltimoreans' lives. But I really want to invite Quan's words into this conversation today because they bring a lot of hope for me, and I'm hoping they'll do the same for you. So this is an excerpt. It's part of a larger essay that Quan wrote. Quan says, I want to be honest with you. Depression is something people like me cannot deal with or handle. So we run to evade our depression, like running towards drugs or something worse than drugs. Instead of us just facing our problems, we just seem to run away from them like it's going to solve something. People like me don't like opening up because it seems like they always get hurt. I know how it feels. All it takes is the right person to change you or push you in the right direction. There's a saying, if you don't have your own story, you're going to be a part of someone else's story. That saying could mean if you don't know what to do in your life, there's possibly somebody out there who can help you. I'm writing this for other students who are going through what I am going through. I want them to know you don't have to give up. There are a lot of things you can turn to that won't hurt you, but will better you. For some people, it's different. Some people turn to drugs to help them out. Some people turn inwards to themselves. They might not even have anyone to turn to, like a loved one or a friend of the family that is looking out for them and pushing them in the right direction and keeping them from hurting themselves. He goes on, but he wraps up with, if you don't feel like you have anyone, even if you don't have the same problems as me, there is still someone in your corner. There is someone who can leave you with some knowledge to not be depressed and give up. I know for some people, reading this might be tough, but in reality, there are a lot of kids in Baltimore City going through a lot. If they don't have their parents, they feel the streets are the only place to go. Kids don't know what to do. Kids out here are committing crimes against the same people in the community that are just like them. They feel they only have one path to go down. I want to speak about what's uncomfortable so I can help make others like me more comfortable. Don't give up. So again, that comes from Quan. He's one of our brilliant youth in Baltimore. This man is only a 10th grader and he's already gone through so much, but I think just his ability to take all of his experiences and still package them up in this inspiring, beautiful, honest story it just made such a difference in my life. And I really wanted to amplify his voice and his experiences with all of you today. So I know Baltimore requires healing. I know it's a heavy job for all of us, especially if we're working so intimately with this work, but I just ask you all to not give up. And I also invite you to join me for a meditation for pain and healing if you want to. If you don't want to, that's okay. It will only be a minute long. So everyone, begin by sitting in a comfortable position. Soften or close your eyes and direct your awareness to your breath. Think of an image, smell, or moment that brings happiness and healing to you. I'm surrounded by my plants. I'm in my healing area. If you don't want to physically move, just think of an image, a smell, a moment that brings happiness and healing to you. A place you find yourself returning to during hard times. Now, direct your awareness to sources of pain, whether emotional or physical. Just breathe gently, naturally, simply follow the rhythm of your breath. As you breathe in, feel your stomach and lungs expanding, radiating energy from your happy space, your happy memories, bringing light and love to the areas of pain. As you breathe out, send love to those areas. Send light, send healing, send release, and start letting go of some of that pain. Breathe in, feel your body getting fuller. Breathe out, letting go of any pain to make way for healing. Breathe in, feeling alive and awake. Breathe out, feeling relaxed and calm. On your final breath, lengthen the breath and breathe in deeply and slowly let it go. Awakening, opening your eyes when you're ready to a restored or new energy of healing. Thank you everyone for going on that meditative journey with me. Of course, I know 1 minute is not enough to unpack decades of trauma, but little mindfulness exercises like this for me really help calm down my entire central nervous system, just really help me focus and really like re-energize and reactivate me. So with that, with this new restored energy of healing, I invite all of our values, all of our collective values, our values of experience, liberation, love, healing, anti-racism, appreciation, liberation, commitment, equity, honesty, authenticity, outcomes, justice, integrity, radical imagination, and of course, trust. So Baltimore Trauma-Informed Care Task Force, this is a call for healing. All of you have already stepped up by being members on the task force. I'm asking, does anyone have capacity to step up a little bit more and help facilitate a future DEI session? These are the topics that we're looking for. And I'm gonna ask people to volunteer for about 1 minute, and I can write your name on the screen, and then we'll definitely send it around in a follow-up email also and get you to volunteer that way. So any immediate takers?
So here's a question. I'm assuming a person should be maybe not an expert, but very well versed in a particular area right before they do it. So I'm thinking about this accessibility 101, understanding ableism. my lived experience, it would play a huge part in there, but I'm not a disability expert. I could pull on people who are to help me with information and explaining things, but I can absolutely speak from my lived experience and how ableism challenges my commitment to peace.
Erica, thank you so much. And I would say you are an expert because of your lived experiences. If you want a co-facilitator, that's absolutely an option, but you got this on your own too.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have Lindsay and everybody else. I'll catch you over email or just as we move on to the next session. Thank you so much.
Wow, Fariha, you were amazing. You are so powerful and so inspiring, and you are my blessing today. So thank you for that. You did a great job. And Anne, we remain on time. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Fariha. Just really, really wonderful. All right, we are now going to move into kind of our main session for the evening, which is our focus on establishing a shared and common knowledge. And before I do that, Zeke, did you have anything you want to add before we go into this next session?
Oh, nope, I'm good. I'm
okay.
Centered and calm, and thank you, Fariha.
Okay, good. So now we are ready to establish a shared common language and the focus on the enduring trauma of racism. I'm very excited that Shauna Murray Brown is going to facilitate this evening's session. You ready, Shauna?
I sure am.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, let me share my screen. Hey, y'all. Okay, let's see if I know what I'm doing. You would think after all of this time of only using this here platform that we would be like full experts. I'm working on it. So, hey, y'all, my name is Shauna Murray Brown. I'm so excited to hold space for us around the enduring trauma of racism, where I will be centering specifically the intersection of historic and racial trauma. This is going to be quick, y'all. I'm going to talk for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to invite us to break off into pairs to reflect and come back. So please know that if I'm going too fast, it's okay, because I can just share the slides. So what you can expect is that I'm going to do a quick recap of the how, when, and to whom of trauma. I'm going to zoom in on historical trauma and the how of that. And then we're going to journey into racial trauma, what it is and how this manifests. And I like to leave things on a positive note. So I'm going to share 5 things we can consider, and then after that, we'll sort of break off into our experience and reflection, and then come back for any Q&A. So y'all probably don't know me. I mean, some people know me, but not everybody know me. So I'm gonna say a little bit about myself. I'm not reading all of this, y'all. I'm a social worker. My work is to support us in reminding ourselves how to heal ourselves. I'm also a 3rd-year PhD student at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, where my research focuses specifically on how to center Blackness in the creation of healing spaces that address race-based and historical trauma, as well as topics having to do with decoloniality. I be breathing, I'm somebody's mama, I'm somebody's lover, but my work really roots and grounds and begins with my commitment to community accountability, to my elder direction and ancestral teachings, as well as the fact that I consider my work a work of spiritual obedience. And I think it is really important for us to be able to ask those that are our teachers where we're coming from, and to ground in those reflections to as a way to sort of qualify how you know what you know and what you're saying when you're saying what you're saying. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hop on in. So what is trauma again? I know we probably all know, but just as an opportunity to allow the space for us to reconnect. Trauma is the response to a physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening event or circumstance that completely overwhelms an individual's or collective's capacity to cope. It likely changes a person's or a community's overall worldview. Now, oftentimes when we talk about this, we talk about trauma, but we don't really have the opportunity often to center on some of the characteristics of this experience, of this reaction, of this response. And so we're going to zoom in on two different ways of thinking about trauma. We're going to talk a little bit about the when it occurred and to whom, or the motive. And then we're going to bring it together in that real nice intersectional way. And so when we're talking about the when of trauma, now y'all know some of this because who was the bomb doctor? Dr. Tamar started us off with a powerful reflection. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but when we think about trauma, we know that it can be single episode, that's one time, it can be repetitive over a period of time, but and it could be intergenerational or historical, right? And when we're talking about single episode and repetitive, we're talking about our lived experience, these tangible things, our memory from this particular lifetime. However, when we're talking about intergenerational and historical trauma, we're talking about traumas that occurred in different time periods, often endured by communities that have been resistance in an effort to push up against the dominant society. And examples of this are invasions, enslavement, the overarching and negative impacts of colonization, imperialism. I know big words, we're not going to go into it real deep, but the when of trauma matters, and seldom is it that we allow ourselves to contend with the complexities of historical trauma, because it is so complex, because we can't always put our finger on it, and because it does often sort of journey alongside our ideas around truth or our spiritual perspectives. Now, we have been talking about ACEs a lot, y'all. We started off with a grounding on ACEs, and then I know at our last meeting we talked a little bit about expanded ACEs, and so I'm just going to throw a third one for us. So we're going to get real comfortable with ACEs, y'all. And this is racing ACEs, right? And so this framework was developed by the RISE Center and really grounds, as you can see here, in the intergenerational transmission of trauma as a groundwork or in a perspective or framework with which we should understand what's happening. And I really love this model as because of its juxtaposition and its acknowledgement and centrality of structural racism, of white supremacy, and the social devaluation of people of color. And I love that it allows a space for even acknowledging how these things manifest. I am going to actually delve more deeply into the ways in which historical trauma shows up in just a few. But one of the things that I think is important for us to begin to contend with is taking a look at this complex trauma and ACEs, social identity threat. We're going to talk a little bit about how this impacts the physical and neurological and biological development of our bodies, how this impacts our ability and capacity to cope, and the ongoing disease and burden of folks. And so absolutely, don't you like the top, Zeke, where it says, if it's not racially just, it's not trauma informed. And so I really love how we take and honor the work that has been done thus far. And instead of just complaining about stuff that's missing, folks just add on to the framework. And I'm happy to share this resource for us to be able to revisit. As you can see here on the side, it talks about implicit bias and epigenetics. And I am going to amplify some of the ways in which this shows up and give some clarity around what it actually means. And so you might be like, Shauna, but tell me how. How are you saying that something that happened maybe to my grandma or my great-great-grandma or my great-great-great-great-grandma, how might that actually impact me? Or my granddad or my great-great-great-granddad or and the other folks in our lineage, what do you mean I might still be impacted by these things that happened in history. And so there are two things that I want to amplify, and then a third I will mention around the how of historical trauma and the ways that we think we understand it now, right? And so Dr. Joy DeGruy, many of us actually talked about her in the first session when Dr. Tamar was sharing insights around historical trauma, but she wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And what was really powerful about the insight and the reflection that she offered is that she provided a lens for how trauma specifically from the enslavement of descendants of Africans enslaved here in the United States, how trauma can be passed down behaviorally and as a cultural norm and shift in the context of survival. 1 second, my toddler has Imar, go downstairs, please. Okay, we'll see how much I can do professionally. All right. So the post-traumatic slave syndrome was the concept that Dr. Joy DeGruy established, and what she really started to talk about. Be quiet, please. What she really started to talk about and frame for us is the ways in which, 1 second. Is the ways in which something like a grandma who sort of learned after enslavement that the way to care for or protect her children was to ensure that that her children weren't running around or playing freely in community, and how that was a way to ensure ongoing survival and engagement for our peoples, right? And so the name of the book is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, yeah? And so basically what Dr. DeGruy amplified for us is that if my great-great-great-grandma established a norm within our society and culture for African Americans around how to ensure that Black children would not be slaughtered, is by assault, right? So through spanking and saying negative words and things as in an effort to control and to keep the children away from the master, that behavior can be passed down and has often been the thing that's been passed down through cultural norm. And so the reason why, or a reason why, we may see many African American families still spanking their children or using these forms of punishment as a means to care for their children is because of the context of enslavement from a historical perspective. So that is how this trauma is passed down behaviorally and in cultural norms. And then we can also think about this from an epigenetic perspective, right? And that is that trauma can leave a chemical mark on a person's genes that can be passed down to future generations. And so it doesn't cause a genetic mutation, but it changes how a gene is expressed. And so what might this look like? This might look like me as a mom enduring some overarching traumatic experience. And then when I have my child, because of the ways that my body has altered in order to protect myself, because the ways that my genes have the genetic mutation occurred, that might be passed on to my daughter. And so this is information and knowledge that was first amplified through the experiences of the Jewish population, and has been a grounding in how we can continue to really focus on how that impacts us collectively and cross-culturally. And so the other aspect of the how of historical trauma that isn't here, but I think is important, is also spiritual, and that's powerfully intangible. I'm not going to spend much time on it at all, but I do want to say that we know it can be passed down behaviorally and culturally. Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about how we actually think certain things are embedded aspects of culture when it's really our response to a cultural trauma or historical trauma. We know that this can impact us genetically or biologically, but it can also impact us spiritually, depending on your perspective and understanding of how these energies move. And so then when we shift to the who of trauma, and our focus, right, is folks of color. And when we zoom in even further, I'm amplifying the experiences of Black folks. And so what is racial trauma? What is race-based traumatic stress? Well, these things refer to the events of a danger related to real or perceived. I feel like I should have highlighted that, real or perceived experiences of racial discrimination. These include threats of harm and injury, humiliating and shaming events, witnessing harm to other folks of color and Indigenous folks due to real or perceived racism, right? And so when we're talking about the who, these are our two different ways of sort of understanding these things, but it's really important for us to get clarity. When we're talking about racism here, we're talking about the pervasive effects of race prejudice plus power, right? And so that is a definition that's been amplified by the People's Institute for Survival and beyond. And from that perspective, we're understanding that racism exists on levels, right? Folks say it's levels to this, that it can be internalized, that it can be interpersonal, that it is institutional and systemic, and that these are the multiplicity of ways that these traumatic experiences can be experienced and realized, and that these things and all of the things that we're unpacking are in fact intersectional. And so when we're talking about the intersection of racial and historical trauma and what it can look like, I'm going to share just a couple insights around what does it look like when we're bringing these two things together? How does this actually impact the lived experience of the folks here in the city of Baltimore and beyond? We have racial battle fatigue, and that's the psychophysiological symptoms, including fatigue, being real sleepy, hair loss, trying to check those edges, high blood pressure, anxiety, frustration, shock, anger, and depression that people of color experience as a result of the pervasive stress from living in and navigating white spaces. I'm not sure, and you can drop in the chat if you've ever heard of the term John Henryism, but John Henryism is that sort of idea that if I just work more, if I just ground more, if I just grind harder, then everything will work out. And there's a whole story behind it. And when we have more time, I'll be happy to share. But what Smith found in 2008 is that grit may exacerbate the symptoms. And so many of the ways that folks navigating white systems might sort of cope is by just going harder when in reality, those things make it worse. And then there's also research that suggests that Black women may age at an accelerated rate as a result of the constant stress due to racism and other forms of discrimination. That's called the weathering hypothesis. And so that means that these experiences of race-based trauma are not just impacting our mental health, they're impacting our physiological health and the ways that we are, ways our bodies are responding and reacting. And then we have internalized racism, right? And so remember back here when I said that it can start from this internalized positioning. And so there's a Baba, an elder Baba in Atlanta, Baba Wakesa Mazimoyo, and he says he don't like the term internalized racism, so he rathers injected oppression, meaning because it illuminates the fact that something's been done to a person as opposed to us sort of like taking the blue pill. And so what internalized racism or injected oppression actually is that when a person has been compounded by these historical harms paired with the realities of racism in the day-to-day experience, that it leads to the development of ideas, beliefs, actions, and behaviors that support or collude with racism. Where we turn the experience of oppression or discrimination inward, and we start to believe the stereotypes in the society that society amplifies as true. I'm not going to be able to play the clip here, but what it could look like, right? There's a link that I can have shared out later around basically young Black girls wishing that their skin was lighter, or that their hair was straight. There's also an experience of the doll test where children will pick the white doll and say that that is a good doll and that the black doll is a bad doll, or even recognizing that they themselves are Black. And so it could look like this inner sort of self hatred that translates into and can translate into our interpersonal relationships as we develop. And when we're working in institutions, it could also serve as being the person at the institution that feels like we can't say Black, or we can't say folks of color, or we can't say immigrant community because that's not serving everybody. That's absorbing the expectations of whiteness and then projecting it outward. And then last, the cultural changes of which I mentioned by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And so with the last, 2 minutes I have before it's important for us to shift into our groups. So I'm sharing 5 things that we can do, right? This is just the beginning, all right? Like this is a 20-minute quick and dirty. So one of the things we can do is to discuss and educate ourselves about racial identity development as a space for intentional healing and affirmation. And then taking those insights and talking about race and difference openly in an age-appropriate way with our children, and demanding that these same conversations are embedded in our institutions, right? Number 3 is that we could use critical action as a healing mechanism after building critical consciousness awareness. What is critical consciousness? That is educating about historical harms, that is educating about systematic oppression, that is educating about the ways that the harms have shown up as a foundation for community-based insight and recommendation. And last is reflecting deeply on your and your institution's worldview and its relationship to maintaining systems of oppression. That is, and very quickly or briefly, taking a look at the ideals that might be white-centric, that are Eurocentric, and acknowledging, having the eyes to see that position where you feel that that nothing is real unless it's counted is Eurocentric. That position that you must control and dominate, or that you can do it all by yourself, is Eurocentric. And so these perspectives and ideals are an invitation for us to begin to see differently and ground ourselves more powerfully in what it means for us to what it means for us to truly transform. Okay, I see that y'all are turning up in the chat, but I wanted to ensure that we had the opportunity to break off to reflect on what comes up for you. And with this lot of information that I share, I will send the slides, y'all. And you helping me with that?
I got you.
Oh, I need some water.
Great job, Shauna. So I think, Anne, we're getting ready to go into our breakout sessions. Is that right?
We are. Yes. Okay. Shauna, I can put the questions in the chat. Do you want to give any prefaced?
No, I think really what I'm inviting us to do is what are your reactions to this information? And how can we apply it to the visioning and the imagination work that we as members of this Trauma-Informed Care Task Force need to do? Or even what came up for you where you just like flabbergasted, so that we know where we need to go deeper?
All right, so I have created pairs, and I'm just going to open the room. The time for discussion is not super long. You're going to have 5 or 6 minutes in your groups, and
it's only 2, so we're good. It's pairs, y'all.
Yeah, it's pairs. So I'll send a note that when you have 1 minute, but I'm going to go ahead and open those rooms.
20 minutes is not a long time.
Flies by. Flies by.
And then, of course, my toddler decides, well, I was just like, you were doing so good.
Solidarity. Solidarity.
I hope I handled it well. I was like, I can't even remember what I was talking about.
You did great.
All the parents of Baltimore, they understand.
3000%.
Shauna, thank you. That was amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad you found that helpful.
Oh, so, thank you so much. Yeah.
Welcome back.
Erica, I'm so glad you got that last sentence out.
I'd like to just snatch you up, don't it? So
I said
welcome
my
back.
last word right at the buzzer. I was on it.
Woo! Welcome back, everyone. I want to invite us to, you can share in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, if you want to share what came up for you. I would love to hear an answer to the first and second question, at least by two people, because we only have a few minutes. And does anyone want to share like what some of your reactions were, or what came up in your reflection? If you want to raise your hand, please do so. Okay, Eric, is that Eric? Okay, you raise your hand. Okay.
I can't find how to raise my Zoom hand, so I had to raise my real hand. I just need to say that this thinking about how language and the terminology we use reinforces the myth of Black inferiority. So for example, the shift that just happened inside of me from internal racism to injected racism, injected oppression, right? Because we do shame ourselves, even like in our community, when we have conversations about colorism among people of color and forgetting where we come from and like all of that good head versus bad head. When we have all of those conversations, it's often like, oh, that's anti-Black and that's self-hatred, as if we naturally and innately
we did it too, like we love it, like we putting it on like that smell good lotion.
Right, like, and so it's not that we naturally and innately would compare ourselves to one another based on our skin color or our hair texture or anything else, right? All of that stuff is injected into us. And so our self-hatred and anti-Blackness is not a naturally occurring thing inside of us. It is a forced thing. But language like internalized racism reinforces the idea that it's us, that it's something wrong with us. Whereas injected racism makes you look outside of yourself like, wait, I hate myself because something is happening to me. We're being anti-Black among ourselves because something has been happening to us and continues to happen to us. And just that small kind of shift, I think if we do really good work, intentional work around looking at language and terminology, we will probably find all kinds of places that we just reinforcing myths.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Erica, thank you so much. I'm taking a look at the chat. We have, so Desiree said that David was dropping some knowledge, okay? And Mark said forced and accepted, absolutely. Tamara said that's a great point, Erica. Injected communicates the violation and force. Language is so important. Mark says reframing minds with proper language. William said this happened distinctly in conflict leasing, especially. And then Daniel was like, yeah, I think Daniel's talking about David dropping knowledge. I think that's what. So David, do you want to share what knowledge you was dropping or?
Hey, I was just saying, Shauna, I know you're a genius. I know you get this. So for me, this is a nice just rehash, and I love the intersectionality of nature versus nurture. That's what this is. So as I was telling Desiree, I did a little bit of genetics at Hopkins. Didn't really care for it, but when they had the section about epigenetics,
exactly.
That's when it started to make some sense, because now it's letting me know that, okay, if there is a continuation or kind of perpetuity of a certain behavior or a certain ideology or a certain just vibe, it will manifest itself somehow in your genetic makeup. Right. And that is what you see passed down from gen. So all the types, again, like you said, spare the rod, store the child, all those type of things that we have heard across generations and wondering why does that happen? There is a genesis of when that began. And so much of it comes down to the enslavement of African people.
And it's so important to know your history, right? Like, and to know the history, like not your personal history, your lineage, understanding and knowledge and history, the societal history, the history of the systems with which you're working in. Otherwise, you won't have the eyes to see. And this work that we are here doing, you got to have the eyes to see, but then you got to have the words and the gumption to speak. And it is, David, everything you say.
Exactly. And that's what makes it what makes it very daunting, is that it's the intersectionality of so many ecosystems. So that's why I love ecological systems theory, Urie Bronfenbrenner, because it helped me to visualize all the different worlds, the different universes, however you want to put it, that we are operating in at the same time. And depending on who you are, you're just operating in that many more universes that are structurally designed to oppress you, to suppress you, to eliminate you. So how do you navigate that, be it within your own self, your family, your neighborhood, your community, city, state, country, world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously the most important universe, time, the one that we all operate under, time.
But I want to say, David, like in alignment with what you just said and what Erica just posted, I think there's actually a powerful juxtaposition here, is the social constructions, right? So time is also a social construction, just as like capitalistic systems. So Erica said, that quote, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," as an ongoing model for activists, for advocates, and for many of us working in our jobs, even if we don't say it, we act it out. That is centering our productive quality. That's a Eurocentric mindset of production and capital over our ability to connect and reimagine. And so I do want to say that whenever I share injected oppression, I always amplify the Baba who told me, because the other thing that tends to happen that I hope that we have the opportunity to sort of blow up, so to speak, or shatter, is this idea that, Baba Wakasa Mazimoyo, he didn't go to get nobody's alphabets, right? But through lived experience and knowing the historical context and working with the children in Atlanta and knowing his connection and lineage, like he knew that that's something that we have to switch. And so if ever y'all start walking around saying injected oppression, make sure you cite Baba Wakasa. I'm gonna type it in the chat.
Please do. And it's and like you said, Shauna, and it gets back to my point. I know I sound like a broken record. It's the stories. It's the stories of our experiences. It's the stories of our families' experiences. It's the stories of our ancestral experiences that are teaching us as much now, if not more, than it was teaching us then. We have to give it the respect it is always deserved. You're right. You don't need these little pieces of paper. You don't need these letters behind your name in order to have this level of knowledge and wisdom and understanding of all the mechanisms of our universe to be taken seriously. You shouldn't have to, but we know that's the system in which we work. So I know that you and I, sure, we're operating within that system, but we're just bringing what our ancestors have always known. Right. And I tell people this, and I say it proudly. That's not a fault. That's the point. You know what I mean? So I'm with you. I'll shut up. I know we low on time. My bad, y'all. Okay.
So I'm done. My time is done. I think we got 5 minutes, and I yield my 5 minutes, right?
All right, we're giving you a standing ovation right now, Shauna. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We are blessed.
How do you do the clapping thing?
It's down in the reactions. Go down at the reactions at the bottom of the screen.
Thanks, y'all.
All right, thank you. We did it again. We have now come to the end of our meeting, and we are 2 minutes ahead of time. We were 3 minutes ahead of time. We were committed to starting on time and ending on time. So job well done. I want to once again acknowledge my amazing co-chair, Councilman Zeke Cohen, who is always thinking about this work 24/7, as can be seen by my text messages that he sends to me all the time. Zeke, is there anything you want to say to close us out today?
No, thank you so much to Freya, to Shauna, to all of the folks who shared the personal presentations. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Just really proud of getting to be part of this group. Some really powerful stuff and conversations, and I can't wait for the next one. Next time we're going to talk about the subcommittees of the task force.
Right.
And we're going to break out what those are going to look like. And then folks are going to get to decide, get to rank which ones you want to be part of. So again, really, really looking forward to it. Thanks also to all the staff who have helped to put all this together. Of course, Anne and Rachel and William and all the different folks who make this task force happen. Very much appreciated. Last thing from me, two things. One is to just plug and hype Erica Bridgeford in the chat. Baltimore Ceasefire Peace Challenge weekend starts tomorrow through Sunday. Please change your profile. I know I'll be doing that to the May Ceasefire logo. Erica, do you have the ceasefire logo? I assume it's on your social media.
It is. So it is on the Baltimore Ceasefire Instagram, Facebook page. And if you go to baltimoreceasefire.com and go to the Get Involved page, you can download the flyer and the posters yourself. So
Awesome.
The poster is what you use to change your profile picture. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So last thing is I need 3 more people who want to share a little bit about themselves for next week.
Is it next week?
Next 2 weeks. Sorry, 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks. I'll go.
All right. I got Erica. Steven Zinn. Am I seeing you?
Yep.
Perfect. Erica, Dr. Zinn. Always the third one that's a problem. All the teachers know this pain. Come on, one more person.
All right, I'll go.
I'm in. All right, Dr. David, good to go. All right, so we got Erica, Dr. Zinn, Dr. David. I will see you all. And what's the date for the next one?
Not next Thursday, but the next. So that is going to be, my calendar's frozen. I think it's the 20th.
The 20th.
Awesome. All right, 7 o'clock. See y'all.
Thanks, everyone.